Many parents will remember the terrible twos when your toddler turns into a tiny tyrant whose favourite word is no. But what happens when they're a little older and still tending towards being stubborn? What's underlying the behaviour coming from a strong-willed child? And how can parents adjust their expectations and reactions to cope with it? Jenny Hale is one of the Parenting Place's senior parent coaches. She's also the author of the book Kind, Firm, Calm: Simple Strategies to Transform Your Parenting. Kia ora, Jenny. Good morning.
Kia ora. Good morning, Catherine.
Well, if we asked everybody for their definition of a strong-willed child, we'd probably get all different answers. How do you define it?
Oh, we would get different answers. I would define it as a relentless child who wants control over most things, if not everything, who wants to win at all costs, who won't back down, who believes they're right and everybody else is wrong. They would be some of the characteristics of a strong-willed child. And some parents have all in one child, and other parents have little snippets in their children. So wherever you're at, there's often a strong-willed element in your children.
So we're talking about not strong-willed in the sense that one might perceive as positive, but to a degree and with a lack of nuance that is potentially negative for everybody involved. Okay, what age might this present? As we said, we expect the toddlers to lose their minds for a bit, and fair enough with what they're going through. But at what age might you see the behaviour that you're talking about here?
Yeah, I think it's worth recognising that it's quite hard to tell, especially if you've got a 2 or 3 year old, because they're naturally going to be wanting to do it myself and wanting the agency and the control. I just think that if you've got a 4-year-old and it's still there, and you've got a 10-year-old and it's still there, it resurfaces again in lots of teenagers anyway. But if it's been with you for a number of years and they haven't gone through a stage, it is who they are. And Catherine, I want to identify it too as it is a positive trait. It doesn't feel like it when you're parenting one. You will feel disrespected, powerless, bewildered, at your wit's end. But I get to the privilege of working with parents who start with a strong-willed child and who later email me and say, guess what? This is what I'm seeing now. And so there is a wonderful need to hang in there when you're parenting one of these kids.
I appreciate you saying that. It's not in itself a negative trait, but just like adults who behave this way, if we're going to play nicely with others and if we're going to function well in the world, we have to learn some boundaries and some behaviours. Okay, so pick up from here again, and perhaps it might be at different ages, but what are some of the experiences that parents have told you about or that you've seen yourself that indicate they have a strong-willed one?
Those experiences will look like a child not being willing to back down, who will want to have the last word, who will not say, sorry, I did something wrong. A child who perhaps just negotiates and debates over everything, who won't let you kind of have, the last word, as it were. Yeah, and who keep this up sort of day in and day out, where you feel like they want to be the parent and they are looking for a vacancy to parent and control. That they would be some of the experiences, as well as seeing children who have really, really big emotions. And so when they're upset, they're really upset. So they don't do things sort of
by halves. Okay.
Yeah,
so what's going on, do we think? What's going on within that child? Their thinking processes, their emotional processes. What are some of the reasons, and this is sans blame, but what are some of the things that might lead to the exhibiting of this behaviour?
Well, I think some of it's in their DNA, and you often look at the parents and talk to them and find out what they were like as children. So there's a little bit of a genetic thing going on where there's that strength and that feistiness and that belief in themselves. But I also know that these kids often have a very sort of fragile underbelly. They're not all full of total confidence. Sometimes they're very sensitive. They sometimes are a child who's a perfectionist, who wants things to be done a certain way. They want to be in control. They don't like making mistakes. They don't want to be wrong. They don't like being corrected. And I think what's going on is that we often feel like what they exhibit is the thing that presses our buttons. But as parents, we've been invited to looking at what else is happening underneath the iceberg. Is this a child who's tired, who hasn't had a lot to control in the day, who feels tricked by friends, who wants a little bit more agency, and whose parents are busy maybe and they aren't giving them much of their head, so they are absolutely demanding it? So we say at Parenting Place, it's really good to look underneath the behaviour. Don't just see the behaviour for what it is. That'll trigger you. But we've got to pause a little bit in parenting and think, okay, let's find out what's been in your day. Let's sit down with a Milo. Let's use some words that aren't inflammatory. Like when we say to these kids, don't you dare talk to me like that, it's almost like we're inviting them to the fight. But if we were to say, honey, something's going on here and I think we need to work it out together. Let's have a Milo. That will give you a totally different response from a strong-willed child.
So the authoritarian parenting style doesn't work here. On the other hand, can you be too permissive and yielding?
Oh, absolutely, Catherine. We can sometimes be overwhelmed by their strength and by they're often very articulate and they've got good arguments. And sometimes it's like we put our hands up in the air and say, I don't know how to parent you. And that is scary for a child when we step aside and we're too permissive. When we sort of say, look, you seem to know what you're doing, so I'm stepping away. A child feels such a vacuum and such a disconnection, because what all of us are looking for in all our relationships is a connection. And for children, they're looking for a lead. So we're working in the coaching style rather than that authoritarian style or that permissive jellyfish style, which we call, where a parent is able to make some calls, is setting limits. There are some consequences, but there's a warmth and a connection that a child feels, because one of these things that strong-willed kids can do so easily is they sabotage relationships. They don't, I think they wouldn't even know that they're doing this, but they get their good stuff taken off them, and they get to hear words like, why are you doing this to me? Why can't you behave like Sophie? She's just doing as she was told. So we make comparisons and we show our lack of sometimes ability to parent them, and the child gets worse. So I'm often encouraging parents, look, you stay in the lead and let your child know they're not too much for you, even if it's faking it a bit while you're making it.
Fake it till make it. The other thing is, before we get into what we're going to look for under that lid, is they're likely not just being this way with you. You talk about them losing their good stuff. They may be losing friendships at school, for example, and other things.
Yeah. They may be. Often friendships, if a child feels like they are always in control and have to be, you can see how that would play out in a friendship where they won't budge or give in or acknowledge somebody else's good idea. It might be that they have an intolerance for losing, and that doesn't work well in friendships where in games there's going to be winners and losers. So there is stuff that parents can really help their children develop skills in when you notice that they've got this feistiness where they won't back down. We need to be watching and helping these kids. But often what's interesting, Catherine, is that they can be in the classroom and often a teacher will say, oh, Samantha's just a delight to teach.
So sometimes it is just for you.
Yeah. Sometimes they're leaving, they're coming home with all the baggage that they've been kind of subject to, and they are bringing home the dregs of the day for
Okay,
you.
so you're going to wear everything else they're feeling. Let's go back to having a look under that lid. You mentioned some important words. One of them is insecurity. And it's my personal little mantra that all bad behaviour comes from insecurity, whether you're a grown-up or a little person. And let's delve into how you might draw out whether this is what is driving those strong reactions. What kind of conversations might you have at different ages?
Yeah, I think you would, when you've seen a bad behavior, we have a little saying, it's not ours, somebody else invented this, but strike when the iron's cold, which means when they're inflamed and agitated and upset, that is not your best time to investigate what's going on. But when you signal, honey, there's something going on here and we'll talk about it. I'll come back and see how you're getting on. That says to a child, rather than I'm being pushed away and silenced, somebody cares for me and is staying connected. And that's when they can be less allergic to some of their feelings, like I'm anxious about there's a spelling test tomorrow and I have to get everything right. And so they hold this anxiety. And so when a parent sits with them and the parent is lovingly close physically, there's a warmth in the atmosphere and is saying, is there anything going on at school that you want to talk about? And out comes that, Andrew wouldn't play with me. He said that I was a bully. So there's a big anxiety there, or a sense of injustice. There's a spelling test tomorrow and I don't know if I'm going to get them all right and I have to get them all right. And then you find out that it's daylight saving or something and they're extremely tired from waking up at 5:30 in the morning or something like that. And you start to understand this big fiery emotion or this standoff that we had has got quite a lot to do with those deeper feelings that were going on. And when a child feels heard, they feel loved. You don't have to even agree with the feelings. But when you can say, oh, that sounds like you're a bit anxious about the spelling test and you felt really tired from waking up so early and maybe it feels like you're not sure if Andrew or Sophie are going to play with you tomorrow. Have I got that right? That gives the child that sense of connection. Someone's with me. And often those big fiery emotions just get a chance to simmer down a little bit. And so we're dealing with anxieties and stresses and all of those sort of things rather than saying, right, don't you dare talk to me like that. Go to your room. Don't come out until you can speak nicely. That kind of doesn't give us, we don't get very far with that.
You mentioned competitiveness, and that this is really interesting because some of the greatest athletes ever just cannot lose at anything. That's their driving force, and you don't want to rob a child's potential, but obviously a competitiveness that impacts on their friendships or impacts on their place in the family. How do you manage that streak where everything has to be won without suppressing it or ruining it, but enabling that child to also participate with others who, who don't want everything to be a win-lose competition? It's a tricky one.
It is, and it's such an important skill for them to learn. And often on the sports field, they're going to have other coaches, so there's a bit of subcontracting, which is delightful to be able to do in parenting. But I think you've got to face it at home, whether you're playing a board game or something like that. And often parents will walk on eggshells and think, oh, just let Johnny win because he'll be really upset and he'll tip the game over. I'm encouraging parents, head up the game with there's going to be a winner and some of us won't, and it'll be hard, but we're going to keep going until the game is finished. And we're going to learn as a family to win well and lose well. And you might have this conversation hundreds of times as you navigate losing. They are never going to love losing, but it's really important that you highlight it as a family character trait that you're going for. We're going to be good at being humble, at being able to acknowledge others and their success. That's why we did the red plate years ago, which is the star of the day, plate, which parents sometimes just veer away from because they think, I couldn't bear the fallout when one child's eating off the red plate that's got star of the day, and everybody else in the family has been encouraged to say, let's say to Ella's finished the cross country. We're not even checking where she came. She finished it. Everyone in the family is saying, well done, Ella. You finished it. How awesome is that? And those who didn't get to eat off the red plate are learning to accommodate their own failure or their loss of not winning. Parents need to be really overt about this, because I think that we're also in a bit of a society that's scared of, especially as kids are in school, scared of having a winner and a loser. And I think we're not calling it winner and loser. We're just letting kids accept that somebody in the family is eating off the red plate and they're not this time. And we shouldn't avoid these moments that are tricky in our parenting.
How do you look after yourself? This is the other thing. You mentioned the relentlessness. And speaking of people who are tired and stressed and worried, well, here's your average parent. So how do you manage yourself when you're in this situation, and again, the sort of the tolerance level is down, and there's a lack of bandwidth for what can be a daily battle?
Yeah. And so I acknowledge that's, as you said, Catherine, it is parents' sort of daily kind of relentless, fronting up and not knowing if they've got enough oxygen to see the day through. Sometimes we're so busy or we're emotionally so stretched that there is very little in the bandwidth. And that's another conversation with how do we actually get something in the tank so we can parent these kids, because they are going to draw from you every bit that you've got. And so, let's take care of ourselves. And also let's address the fact that often parents are really tough on themselves. They walk around with a sense of failure, or I haven't done this well, or I shouted again today. I think we've got to turn towards ourselves in a compassionate way, saying, you know what? You really do care about your kids. You're doing the best that you can. You're accessing some new resources. And today you took them to the park, you smiled, you read them a story, you're doing what you can. That's a very different thing to listen to than the, here you go again, ruining your kids' lives, messing up with their heads. They're going to need counselling later on. I think we can be critically minded, and that does not serve us well. So I want parents to be compassionate towards the job that they're doing, and they're doing often the best that they can.
Very good, Jenny. Thanks for that. Much appreciated. I think you've got a course on this, actually, haven't you? With if people are wanting to learn more of your approach.
Yeah. We've just put together the Strong-Willed course. It's online. Parents do it at their own speed, their own rate, and it's just come out today. So it's fresh off the press. The Strong-Willed Child. So if you go to our website, parentingplace.nz, you will be able to find it.
Thank you for that. Jenny Hale, who is with the Parenting Place, author of the book Kind, Firm, Calm, Simple Strategies to Transform Your Parenting. Today we were talking about the strong-willed child.